Hello, everyone.
Good morning. Welcome back to another video of Live with Your Lobbyist with us here in Helena. We're back for the first full week of committee hearings after the transmittal deadline. So everybody got to go home and have a nice few days off, a break from Helena, a break from committee meetings and floor action. And so it was refreshing to have a little bit of time. And thanks for everybody who's tuning in this morning. Let us know where you're watching from. And as always, please chime in with any questions or concerns that you have. Even if if it's a bill we haven't talked about, please go ahead and throw those questions on for us. We'll be taking a look at the comments. Nicole joined us this morning. I'll just touch base on a couple of things she's trying to share with us all. You will be receiving an action alert in your email if you haven't already gotten it to submit comments on the Clean Water Act or the Clean Water Rules. And so that will come from our voter voice, and that's what Nicole was visiting with you all about. So be sure to look through your emails. Please respond to that. I know that Nicole put a lot of great information in that action alert for you all to help walk you through what we're doing. And collectively, as a Farm Bureau organization nationally, we'd love to see, I think this morning I saw the challenge is 50,000 comments to come in from farmers across the country. So hopefully all of you guys will tune into your email and reach out to Nicole if you have specific questions about that and what they're trying to do there. The second thing that we want to make sure everybody's aware of that Nicole will be planning and leading this summer is the MFBF Washington, D.C. fly-in. And if you go onto the website at mfbf.org, and if you go under the Policy and Advocacy tab at the top of the homepage, you will be able to click on, I think this is going to get changed to actually say MFBF fly-in. Currently, right now, it's called the Advocacy and Action Incentive Program. So if you want to go ahead and click there, it'll take you to an application. And that application is due, I think, the very beginning of May. I'm trying to pull it up, and now I'm having my own issues. But the application's due the very beginning of May. So we want you to fill out that application, and the winners or qualified applicants will be selected to travel to Washington, D.C. with Nicole in July to participate in congressional meetings, as well as participate in some AFBF events and activities that we have going on in DC in July. So the application's all focused around your legislative and congressional advocacy efforts. What have you done? What have you done with your county farm bureau? What have you done as an individual? So please take a look at that. It's a really great program and opportunity that Nicole has put together for everybody to get their boots on the ground back in DC and experience that process. So we're going to have a lot more information coming out on that. So please stay tuned to Facebook as well as Instagram and your email too for County Farm Bureau leaders. We'll be sharing that information because it's a pretty great program that we would love for as many people as possible to take advantage of. So again, with that, please chime in with any questions. We've got a lot of our crew traveling today to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Sure, it's going to be tropical there this time of year. So they're traveling today. Thanks for watching from the airport, guys. And let us know if you have any questions. Liv's going to start off the legislative update with two of the new bills that we heard this week.
Yeah, so after transmittal, we don't experience a whole lot of new legislation. We're hearing a lot of the legislation that we've already worked on in the opposite chamber. So all of our House bills are now in the Senate, and all of our Senate bills are now in the House, other than our revenue bills. But two new bills that we worked on. The first one was House Bill 402. It was introduced by Speaker Hertz, and it's in response to the Aquatic Invasive Species Program here in Montana. So in 2016, they had suspect positives for zebra and quagga mussels. And in the 2017 legislature, one of the measures that they took was allowing counties in the Columbia River Basin to implement their own ordinances, essentially. And with that, a couple of those counties have opened up their own inspection stations. So that's a good program for them to add essentially more measures to that program at the county level. But the issue was that with those ordinances, they had no way of enforcing them. So the beginning of this bill gives those counties the authority to enforce that. It gives them the option to enforce penalties, whether they did it knowingly passing through an inspection station or unknowingly. So we supported that. We support the AIS program and definitely support counties being able to enforce these programs that they're doing. However, the remainder of the bill we aren't so jiggy with. So essentially what it does is it extends a current program that allows counties to assess a levy, a property tax levy, on property owners in their county for vertebrate prevention measures. So essentially a county could decide that they wanted to assess a levy, a mill, for prairie dog prevention. And that makes sense. It's a common sense measure for you to tax egg land because prairie dogs negatively affect egg land. What they are doing is they're adding invertebrate programs into this funding mechanism. So essentially this program, we would be able to, counties all over the state, not just in the Columbia River Basin, would be able to tax property owners in that county for AIS prevention, which is a non-starter for Farm Bureau. So we oppose that bill. It was heard on Wednesday in House Natural Resources and did receive a lot of opposition in regards to the property tax provisions in that bill. So we're hoping that that either gets amended to remove that language or dies in committee.
I think another important piece of that bill that led to a lot of the strong opposition it received was the fact that we have yet to establish a secure funding mechanism for AIS prevention and control at the state level. That's one of the key topics this legislature is focusing on, is how are they going to continue to fund that program and where the money should come from. So for our perspective, there's still going to be a state funding mechanism involved as well, but nobody really knows what that's going to look like yet. So it was really concerning to be passing additional laws that allowed added layers of essentially taxation when we don't even know exactly how the final funding mechanism from the state is going to work out. So we certainly know the importance of prevention and control of AIS, especially as it applies to the agricultural industry. However, we think we need to be very conscientious about how we proceed here until we know exactly how this funding mechanism is going to work.
Yeah, and I think that today they're actually planning, they're doing a joint subcommittee with both the Senate and the House to talk about this issue because it is a big issue and it's not cheap. So they're working on that hard today, and you'll hear probably more updates from us in the coming weeks on AIS funding here in Montana. But another bill that we worked on that was new this week was heard on Tuesday, Senate Bill 317, introduced by Senator Mike Lang. It's a pretty simple bill, and it's kind of following suit from what a couple other states have done. I think Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Dakota all do this. They've implemented a 10% overweight wintertime permit. So in the winter, our roads freeze and they are able to withstand a little bit heavier weight. So this bill essentially creates a permit for individuals to purchase either a wintertime permit that lasts 30 days or a durational permit that lasts December 1 to March 7th, I believe. Notwithstanding, I mean, they could change that if weather was not like it is this winter and is warm. But it allows any trucker to have a weight that's 10% heavier than the regularly allotted weight. We supported this. It's something that I think it's a common sense bill. It adds efficiency to our truckers, and it's not breaking up the roads that we all use during the summer because of that wintertime freeze. So,
and that applied to all commercial
yes,
or
thank
non.
you.
So,
Yep.
something that would be an additional benefit and
Yeah.
potentially positive resource for
Yeah.
people to have access to through the winter months.
I know that bill is incredibly important for timber because they carry some very heavy loads, and during that spring thaw, they aren't able to haul as much timber as they can in the winter. So it was a very good bill for them as well.
Mm-hmm. Other than that, those were the two new bills we heard this week. So the rest of the workload, as we alluded to earlier, was all just continued follow through for bills that we've already heard. And there was plenty of them this week. With this initial transmittal deadline, the volume of new bills that get introduced certainly decreases. However, there are a few other additional transmittal deadlines for bills that meet other parameters. For example, any bill that is a revenue bill or has an appropriation of funding attached to it, all of those bills have a later transmittal date of April 1st. So while the new bills have certainly decreased, that doesn't mean that we're not still watching what's introduced, because there's always going to be the potential for new bills to enter the process up until about April 1st. And so while we only had 2 new bills this week, there is the potential for a couple more to come out next week. Please take a look at the comments if you're watching. Nicole is sharing the link there to go to the American Farm Bureau's website and submit your comments on the clean water rule. So you should be able to just click the link that she shared within that comment. A few of the other bills that we worked on this week that were repeat bills but are continuing to make their way through the process. The first of those was House Bill 229, which was heard Monday in Senate Natural Resources. And it was the bill that actually, I think Nicole talked to you guys about this bill initially. It was the dinosaur fossil bill. And something kind of interesting and not really a topic that we have been talking about a lot. So it was a very interesting thing for us to be a part of. That bill was amended in the House and came to the Senate hearing with, I believe, no opponents, correct?
Yeah, so there were a few opponents the first hearing it had in the House, and then they were able to work with the sponsor, work with the proponents to amend that to allow them to support it. So there were no opponents in Senate Natural Resources, which is exciting. There were a ton of proponents. And after that bill was done, they felt so confidently about passing that bill that they took exec that day, which is pretty rare in other than transmittal time, but they did. That passed unanimously out of Senate Natural Resources that day. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm.
And also on the schedule for earlier this week was Senate Bill 137, which you worked on that one as well.
So farmers or anyone who receives the majority of their income from agriculture are able to apply for the, I think it's agricultural fuel refund, essentially, because a lot of the fuel that they're paying for, they are not using on our roads. So they're able to receive a refund for that tax. And in current law, it says you can return in your receipts, but they have to be credit and debit card receipts, which I think was just an oversight when they put that into law. So this bill simply makes it so that any kind of receipt is permittable. So you could use your checkbook or your credit or debit card. So very, very simple bill. No opponents.
Now, also on Tuesday, we heard Representative Redfield's Real Meat Act. It's House Bill 327. It was heard in the Senate Agriculture Committee and had a great hearing there. And they have not taken executive action on that bill yet, but it's continuing to move really positively through the process. And you'll recall that was the piece of legislation that deals with adding a definition of what can be considered meat in the state of Montana and requiring that anything which is a cell-cultured edible product must be labeled as such and may not be labeled as a meat product. And that meat is actually something that comes from or is derived from a live animal. So that was a good hearing and plenty of support for that bill. There was only one opponent that stood up in the committee that day. And I expect that the Senate committee is going to take exec on that probably on Tuesday is what the plan is. Going from there, moving into
Wednesday. Senate Bill 81 was one that we spoke with you guys very early on in the process. It was a bill that originated from the Water Policy Interim Committee, and it essentially extends the deadline of 30 days to 120 days to correct an application for a change in water right. So when you are applying for a change in water right, you send that off to DNRC, and they may have a few deficiencies. They may need some additional information from you. So they'll send you a deficiency letter, and in current law, you have 30 days to respond to that letter with the option to extend to 90 days. This bill would just cut the 30 days. You have 120 days to respond to that deficiency letter. That's it. So we supported that, and it was heard in House Natural Resources on Wednesday.
Yesterday, Thursday, was a relatively busy day for us in the afternoon. We were in Senate Agriculture, House Agriculture, House FWP, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and House Taxation early in the day. Senate Agriculture had quite a few hearings yesterday. We were in on 2 of those bills. House Bill 520, again, came through the House with no problems, and this is a bill that is seeking an additional $100,000 appropriation for the Livestock Loss Board's reimbursement and predation grant program. So we strongly support this bill. Livestock loss and predation conflicts are something that we're seeing increase across the landscape for a lot of our neighbors and landowners, and probably ourselves as livestock producers in a lot of cases. And in the 2017 session, we added an additional predator to it. So under the current statute regarding who's eligible to receive reimbursements, anybody who has predation loss due to grizzly bear, wolves, or mountain lion are eligible to apply for a reimbursement grant. However, when we added mountain lions as an additional predator in 2017, there was no additional funding added, and their base budget is $200,000 a year. They exceeded that in 2018, and they've already thus far in 2019, they've already exceeded or expended roughly 180,000 of that $200,000. So the difference, they've not been going in the hole, so to speak. The difference has been covered by federal funds that are used for prevention measures. So they do receive a small amount of federal funding through AFBF for predation prevention efforts, and that funding has been able to help mitigate the differences between the demand that we're seeing because of predation loss across the landscape. So we support this bill. I think $100,000 is an appropriate amount to ask for. They have been seeing the expenditures total somewhere in the neighborhood of between that 200,000 mark up to approximately the 230 to 235,000. So I would not say they're asking for the moon here, but this bill had another great hearing yesterday as well and should be moving through the process quickly. The second bill that we testified on in Senate Agriculture yesterday was House Bill 586. And this bill is being carried by Representative Brad Hamlet, and it essentially allows a small exemption in the state's long-range building program specific for the veterinary diagnostic lab in Bozeman. Many of you are probably familiar with that issue. It's something that we've been following closely. The veterinary diagnostic lab is a state-owned lab that is in a building which is owned by MSU. It's on the edge of campus there in Bozeman. Essentially, they've reached a point where basically everything in that building's grandfathered in. They need to make updates and changes to that building. Frankly, they need a new building. And that's been something that has been a topic that the Department of Livestock and the Board of Livestock have been trying to navigate along with industry stakeholders for quite some time now. And so this bill came as a result of an interim study group made up of legislators and some industry stakeholders who took a really close look at how are we going to make this lab possible. And so House Bill 586 just provides a small exemption saying that it's not if you find, specific for the veterinary diagnostic lab, if we are to find a situation in where the state or the Department of Livestock could sign a contract leasing a building with the option to purchase, they would not be required to wait on the 2/3 vote of the legislature or be included in the long-range building program. So that we think is beneficial because we certainly don't want to see any lapse in the services provided by that lab. That lab does a lot of testing that's not only important to the industry, but also from a public health perspective for issues like brucellosis, rabies, tuberculosis, things that have zoonotic properties and can be transferred from wildlife to or livestock to humans. So we certainly do not want to find ourselves in a position in this state where we're waiting on a finished option or a building and have a lapse in services. So we supported 586 as just another tool to allow the state to continue to navigate this and hopefully find a solution to the issues they're having there in Bozeman.
Yeah, so while Nicole was in Senate Ag, I ran over to House Ag, where we had Senate Bill 133 introduced by Senator Bruce Gillespie, and that bill requires that anyone that is going to be receiving livestock loss mitigation payment, so from the Livestock Loss Board that Chelcie just talked about, it requires that they be up to date on their per capita fees. So while those payments do not directly come from per capita, the Livestock Loss Board is administratively attached to the Department of Livestock, whose budget requires per capita fees to be operating and running. So we think this is a common sense bill. If you are going to play in the program, you should be paying in the program. So that received a good hearing. It does sound like it will be amended. But we are looking forward to that coming out of House Ag as well. Senate Bill 73, Senator Heinbaugh's bill. That bill makes commodity brokers in the state of Montana, it makes them follow the same requirements that commodity dealers have to require. So commodity dealers, they have to be licensed, they have to be bonded, they have to provide surety to the department and farmers that they are financially stable. And that's important on a couple different levels, because if they enter a contract, there is some assurance that those farmers will be paid. The issue that we're running into here in Montana is these online brokers who have no requirements are guaranteeing a high price for, say, pulse crops. And they, as soon as that price drops, they're out, they're nowhere to be seen, and we have no mechanism of tracking them or enforcing these contracts that they have entered with farmers. So this bill essentially says you as a commodity broker have to follow those same requirements that the commodity dealers have to follow. So
one thing I will throw in there about Senate Bill 133, there was some discussion yesterday in the hearing about whether or not your per capita fees are a mandatory or voluntary fee. You heard it here, folks. Your per capita fees are not voluntary. No. While they are not an enforced fee, the Department of Livestock does not have per capita fee collectors. They are administered through the Department of Revenue, and livestock owners throughout the state of Montana are required to pay your per capita fee annually. So I just want to make that statement here as well to help remind everyone that that's not a voluntary fee. It's just not enforced, and that it's something that is funding, I want to say, close to 80% of the Department of Livestock's budget every year. So it is a very important thing to allow that department to continue to do the work that they do for our industry.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chelcie.
So please check out Nicole's next comment about the DC fly-in in July. I talked about it just a little bit after she got off, but she's got more information in that comment or in her comment there about where you can find the application. And we will be putting more information out on that. And yes, there is she just shared a great blog from one of last year's participants. So if you're interested but not sure what the trip entails, please click on that link and check it out, because it's a really fun event that Nicole has put together for everybody in DC in July. So with that, We're still, I think that's about it.
Yeah.
So if you've got any questions, we'll hang out here for just a moment. If anybody's got any questions about anything specific, there are still a couple of relatively big ticket items that we're waiting to see surface in this legislative session. One of them, of course, we talked a lot about already, is the funding for aquatic invasive species. And Liv mentioned earlier that there's going to be sort of a joint committee meeting. It's not an official hearing. Mostly, I think they're just trying to collaborate on the two versions of a funding bill that exists right now and figure out which pieces from each could potentially be put together. So that's happening today. And then the other bill that we're still waiting to see is the fire assessment fee bill.
And that is set to have a hearing next week on Tuesday, I believe. Don't take that for sure. But that bill essentially, it takes what was a voluntary assessment on wildland in the western portion of the state and makes it a statewide assessment that all landowners, excluding cities and towns, have to pay per parcel. So there are amendments that are going to change that to an acreage basis. We don't like the bill either way, but as it stands, it is currently creating an assessment per parcel. There is an additional fee if you have timber and an additional fee if you have a dwelling on site. So essentially they're taking what was once a voluntary tax and placing it across the entire state. So we've got issues on the fact that eastern landowners don't typically have the fires that landowners on the west side of the state have. A lot of issues with this bill. We'll definitely keep you in the loop next week when it has a hearing, but that's one of our big ticket items next week.
All right, guys, I think we are going to go ahead and sign off. We've taken enough of your Friday morning and I don't see any questions. If you're watching the replay, please go ahead and leave your questions in the comments. We do see those and we'll chime back in with information when we read them. So thank you all for tuning in. We hope that you have a great weekend and we'll see y'all next week.
Happy early St. Patrick's Day, guys.
Yeah.